All right. Well, thanks for coming. I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah.
So, Chris, what's top of mind? What are you most interested? What are your current research interests?
So at the moment, there are two sides to the research. Well, actually, I'm preparing for a lot of research. One is building this as-you-go communications infrastructure with the Liberate Science team, which is totally different from after-the-fact articles. So it communicates more each step as you go along the process.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side of it is, well, it's all fun that we're building this, but there is so much more than just building a tool and then being like, here it is. So it's a big community effort as well. So I'm thinking and working with the Liberate Science team on creating more community involvement and actually saying, hey, the people who use this software, you get to co-create it. To really say, well, it's not just something we own, it's something we all own. So if you need something from it, that you also have a way to take ownership, get it in there, co-create what you need for your work so that it actually really is contextualized and grounded in that reality of researchers. And in order to make that as pluralistic as possible, we also need to really make that a community where people feel safe from all kinds of walks of life, but also from different career stages. So I'm very interested in that dynamic at the moment.
Well, that sounds very in the spirit of the highest goals of science, right? For everyone to actually own part of the process. You said you were preparing to do research. So is that, can you expand on that? What do you mean by preparing?
I finished my PhD in April of this year.
Congrats.
Thank you. And I've come out of that with a lot of ideas and a lot of questions still that I want to research. But one of the big issues is that I'm really done with writing papers in this way. Managing these entire projects for 2 to 3 years from A to Z. And then at the end, really, it feels almost unmanageable because there are big databases. There is this whole process. I need to remember what I did 3 years ago. And I'm so sick of that I actually also partly the reason why we're building this software, why I'm so motivated in this as well, is because that's the only way doing research excites me still. So preparing in the sense of as the software matures and becomes usable, that also means that I can pick up the work again. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Okay, so the work with Hypergraph that you've described, let me see if I can clarify it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So what I think we're seeing in a bigger, broader sense is that academia and science tried to do what they've been doing for the last 100 years on the internet, which is papers and journals and peer review process. And it just hasn't quite worked very well. And what we're seeing are major cracks in that system, and people starting to try and put band-aids on those problems by, the open science movement, where it's open access journals, or, the rise of preprints, all of these like emergent partial solutions to the problem. What you're doing, it sounds like, is kind of rethinking it from first principles. Is actually, if we're thinking about discovery in the digital age, how does that look? Is that the way you're thinking about it?
That's exactly how this came about in this question of if we would go back to the drawing board and we have the tools and the knowledge of today, what would we do differently? Because pretty much what happened is we took papers, we put them on a screen, and that has been the biggest transition in essence. I'm reading this dissertation from 1983, which actually already says, well, electronic journals, they haven't caught on yet, but they will in the next, say, decade or so. And we actually, well, that has come true, but that is all that has come true. And I think that especially given how communication has changed so invariably in other domains, it's this question of why are we still pretty much, if you would put the papers from 1665 and the papers from today, they do look somewhat different, but the core of it is still the same. And we know that the current system has a lot of issues, and that what we want actually, so the opposite of those issues, is very difficult to do with articles. And we see that, for example, taking to their logical conclusion, if we think about preprints, I'm a very big fan of preprints,
right?
But there are still these human biases that can creep in, like selecting on the results whether you actually write up the preprint. A lot of this bias is in the author side. So even if everybody would use preprints, there would still be selective publication to a certain degree. So you get to this question, is that then what we want to strive for? If we already know now that, taken to its logical conclusion, that's not going to be enough.
Right. So it's interesting. So if you're starting from scratch, I mean, we're never really starting from scratch. Where are you looking for inspiration outside of science and academia? What other fields or models are you looking at and thinking, this is a good way of doing it? Let's bring this into this new paradigm.
So I look mostly into the cooperative movement in that sense, because I think it's very easy to start looking at, how does a tech company do things, and how can we use tech to solve these issues? And ultimately, these are social problems, and ultimately, the progress needs to be social and community driven as well. So for me personally, it's mostly that what I try to look at, because it's about distributing access to knowledge. It's about distributing the power behind how that knowledge is produced, and the technology won't change that, because those structures have been the same across different technologies as well. So yes, those powers may shift. We've seen some of these shifts already happening, but we haven't seen that power be restructured. And the approach that I try to take is also ask this question every time: are we just shifting the power, or are we restructuring it? And the cooperative movement really exemplifies that to me.
So when you say cooperative movement, are you talking about, Arizmendi, or are you talking about some of the new digital cooperative stuff, or both? What are you researching and looking into to find that inspiration?
So it traces back all the way to the Rochdale principles around 1840 in the UK, where they pretty much said, hey, if you want to do business, be honest, don't deceive people, charge fair prices, everybody should be able to participate. There needs to be clear community governance protocols, and pretty much democracy at work, they say. And then you can trace that line all the way to today. Of course, it's not a straight line, but where they really try to, within the system that we have, really try to radically do it different. And I think that also indicates within the scientific communication or scientific research system that we have, we try to do it differently. And so that is also very inspirational to me. It won't be easy. It's not a project, that you get done in 3 years. That really is a lifetime project in that sense.
Right.
And also something that can't be done by one person, and also shouldn't be dependent on one person, because it's not, that's not how history works in that sense.
So how big is the Liberate Science team now? And I don't know where you draw the lines of people on the team versus contributors.
Yeah, so in that sense, like formally employed, we're a total of 4 right now, 4 full-time. Then we have a volunteer who joins, and we have 2 contractors. So we're 7 right now.
Cool. Awesome.
And beyond that, we have some researchers who work on projects with us. And so So it's growing, but definitely not as massive as some other projects. But that's how it always starts.
Yeah, especially, you know, given the kind of the structure and the philosophy of co-ops, I think, you know, sometimes, you know, starting small is the right, you know, it seems like it's on the right trajectory and no one can stop you from doing it. So that's a good thing.
And movements need to be grown in that sense. And
exactly.
Organically is also way better because the growing pains are also real.
Right.
And you don't want to grow too fast and then lose the momentum.
Right. Okay. So I'm really excited because the reason we are having this conversation is because you announced that you're starting to do walkthroughs of Hypergraph, your first product.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the embodiment of some of the ideas you've just been discussing. And I'm really excited to see it. So would you mind sharing your screen and kind of walking me through it? I'm really excited.
Sounds good. So I'm going to show you an alpha version.
Sure.
We've been adding a lot of features in the past weeks. So it's actually very close to being complete in the feature set. But yeah, so we're very proud and I'm happy to hear any form of feedback. So if you can see my screen.
I can, yeah.
Cool. So this is if you would launch Hypergraph for the first time, you'd get some information about what it actually tries to do. I'm going to skip through it a bit because we pretty much talked about that. And it also tries to make it visually appealing because we think that scientific software often is actually very, very dull in that sense. It's very sterile and it does what it's supposed to do, but we think that, you know, doing research can be fun.
Right, of course.
And actually already in the stage where we say, let's create a profile, there's already a very deep philosophical part to it, to me at least. So we can fill out our name and we can, you know, that becomes our profile. But we actually, what we get is to a very big issue in the current publishing structure, which is that it's very difficult to change your name on publications you have. And in Hypergraph, because it's web-based, actually what you can do is you can just, you know, at any time point, go and change your name. So if, for example, you're transgender and you're transitioning and you change your name, you can do that here as well. And then immediately all the content you shared gets updated as well. So you don't get dead named anymore. Or if, you know, you get married and you change your name, you can just update it. So that immediately is one of those tiny issues, but because we transitioned from this old publishing system and we recreate it, we get to do this very rapidly.
Oh, that's an interesting example, right? They're one of those really little things that you're able to do. Interesting, cool.
Yeah, and if you start up Hypergraph, like you have a profile. Everything is still empty right now because, you know, you haven't done anything yet. But then if we go to this add content screen, immediately it's going to be different from our regular publishing. So as I mentioned, it's all about this as-you-go communication of research steps. And you can have a lot of different research steps. You can have a theory section, a hypothesis, a prediction, design, procedure, methods, equipment, data, you name it. And you can include it in Hypergraph because all of these are different steps, right?
Yeah.
So
one of the things I noticed in these conversations is the importance of notes. You guys have a way to kind of, I don't see notes listed there.
So in that sense, what we do with these content types is we use Wikidata. So we pretty much say we don't define what content you can share, because we know that this is this will evolve over time. And if we like normatively say these are the the steps in the research process and that's it, then we'll be excluding people very rapidly. Yeah. So we pretty much say, okay, these are the basic ones we add, but we can grab more and more from Wikidata. So we're not limited. So notes could actually also be included in that. If you mean more like highlights, and notes on annotations.
Yeah.
That's something we don't do because it is a publishing infrastructure.
Got
so
it.
for your own annotations, those can live in their own respective applications.
Okay, got it.
So in essence, let's say we would add a hypothesis, because we know pre-registration is important to make sure that the tests that you do are actually registered before you have the results and not optimized for the results. So, and then what we do, we can say pre-registration for tests of, say, self-control study. I have a psychology background, so this is what I come up with now. And then, so each research step has a title and a description. And the description is pretty much like an abstract. It gives a short summary. And we can then add some files to it. So I'm gonna shortly add an R Markdown file as an example. And what we can do is then delineate, okay, what is the main file of that research step? Because if you add multiple files, you don't want to go into this content and then have to figure out what is it that is actually the core of it. So I'm actually also going to add the HTML file of the R Markdown file. I'm going to say, okay, that's the main file, and the R Markdown file is the supporting file. And then we can already add that to profile. So if you've prepared your research, then you can say, hey, I want to share this now. So you can add this to your profile. And that's the full publication procedure, pretty much. It's now there for, say, you have Hypergraph on your computer. You can now see this if you follow my profile. And you can provide like edits, etc.
So you can create, so it follows you even from these kind of earliest stages when you're just putting together your hypothesis.
Exactly.
Wow.
So that is very much this cooperative and collaborative spirit that actually we change from these one feedback moments as we have them now during peer review, like at the very end of the process. We actually say, hey, let's move that all the way into the front and have feedback moments as often as we go along.
Yeah.
And I think that's for the quality. As a researcher myself, I've reviewed registered reports, which means the people submit their introduction and their methods section for peer review, and then they only start the study after that's been approved. And I love reviewing for those because it makes me feel like I can actually contribute something still, instead of being just you did this wrong, you did that wrong, you can't answer this question with these data.
I'll tell you, it makes total sense to me. Can I tell you a quick story?
Yeah.
Is I am, like I told you before, I'm not really a scientist. Like I've been kind of alongside science and working on it, but I actually haven't I haven't published any papers. And I am really curious about a question related to science funding. And I'm actually starting to formulate a study right now. And it's actually harder than I thought it would be. And I really do need feedback on it. Like I do need feedback from some pro scientists or other people in general. And the interesting part about that is, I've had to kind of, do it on Google Docs and create that from scratch. And so I think what you're describing here is really important, not just for being helpful for scientists like yourself, but for actually bringing new people into the whole process. So anyways, I appreciate that, because I'm struggling with this right now. I'm not struggling, learning about it right now.
Yeah, and I think this is also exactly part of the beauty of this more this stepwise communication, is because you actually allow everybody to bring their expertise and to contribute the step that they can, and then subsequently they get recognized within the full lineage of that research journey. So for example, if you have collected data, like you can post the data, but say you need somebody to help with the statistical analyses, and then I could help, for example. I could take the next step, and then you could see those results again, and you could pick up the baton again. So
does the feed, is it just like a Twitter feed or like a like any kind of a social feed where you're just seeing a stream of all of your networks work go by? Is that how that works?
So yeah, in essence, it's very similar to the construction of the Twitter feed. So I can go there. I'll show something about this later. And it actually showcases indeed then this is now all that's in the feed because it doesn't follow somebody else's profile.
Okay, got it.
If something new would pop up, it would immediately come in here. And actually then what immediately allows us to do is we could click on it. We could see all the files, because what happens is we actually don't run any servers on our end. What we do is we actually use this, this internet protocol that allows people's computers to talk to each other directly. So a peer-to-peer protocol. So in that sense, nobody comes in between, nobody controls the information flows. It's all between the users. And so this...
And it's also not on, is it on any kind of a centralized cloud, or it lives on different, everyone's machine?
So it lives on everyone's machine. So if you see this, you could open up the folder. And actually, it has all these files right on your device for you to interact with. So you can also create copies and use them, because that's one of the key aspects as well. When you start up Hypergraph, like part of the terms is, we want to promote collaboration and reuse. So we say, hey, everything that you post, you agree to using the CC0 public domain dedication, so that anybody else, doesn't have any legal uncertainty around, can I actually use this for my research? Because, in order to build things, we need to reuse something. And so in order to stand on the shoulders of giants, we need to actually be able to get onto those shoulders. And we take a very opinionated stance in that, which I think is quite radical right now, but I think it will pay off once people start seeing that you can actually really do much more quality research if you can actually, reuse the survey questions, etc.
Sure. So how do you actually add a comment then? Like, is it like a pull request kind of thing, or how does that work?
So in essence, we have this step, and if we go back to the general feed, we have this plus sign here on the right. We're not completely set on this plus sign yet, but pretty much what it means is add the next step. So that would mean that anything I see in my feed, that could be my content or somebody else's, I could say, hey, I want to make the next step. So we had the pre-registration, and now we want to say, hey, we collected some data. Usually we would first include, for example, of course, a study design, etc. But for this example, let's do it like this. So I prepared some data. So this is just a regular CSV file. And we can add that as our main file. And then we know that this is the data for self-control study. And this would then be immediately linked to this previous step. So we could, share this, would be available for everyone. If we would click on the funnels.csv, because it lives on your device. Excel is always fun. Then you could have this data right on your device for you to play with. So you could analyze this in R. Excel users will recognize that it doesn't really recognize comma separated files, but all the data is in here, and we could use this for statistical analysis or something else.
Interesting. So if I got, so then if I was following you and I saw your data and I had a question about it, how would I just kind of send you a message over some other medium to ask that, or is that, how does that all work?
Yeah, the idea indeed is that this is really a platform or an infrastructure to share research results and content, and then all the other more ephemeral communication that happens outside of it. So this is really a record, and we also want to recognize that a lot of conversations need to be ephemeral and need to happen within the privacy of people's email or WhatsApp or anything. So we'll be adding probably an option to add your email to your profile or integrate with ORCID, where it gets it from, so that you can easily email the authors of a research content.
Great.
And the designs will change a tiny bit, but we see here the data for the self-control study. And then actually its parent, the preceding step, is immediately here above it. So it says the pre-registration, and we can easily go like, hey, we click on this, and then we go back and we have these files, and we can click on, this manuscript file, which we then actually open in a browser at this moment, which we can then look at and read, or this R Markdown file, which we can then open directly in our editor for these dynamic documents, which allows us to really stick close to whatever software researchers are already using. So we're not saying like if you use RStudio like here, that you have to drop it, or if you use Jupyter Notebooks, that you have to drop those. You can keep using those, and you can actually then also really easily include them. We do promote the use of HTML files for work down the road, but yeah, that's still forthcoming.
Cool.
And then what happens is that we have this profile. You see it's an alpha version because the layout is a bit has been a bit messed up. This release was from like an hour ago, so lots of stuff always changing.
Yeah, cool.
And actually, then I could show you this with the names. So it now says my name is Chris Hartgerink, but actually when I was younger, I had a different name. So let's say I would revert back for just a second, and then look at the name here. So actually, if we now hit save, it immediately updates all of those.
Oh, cool.
What happens is that we sort of separate out the content and the profile and make sure that those are linked with each other, so that if the profile changes, the content still refers to the profile, but it needs to get the actual metadata for the profile. So that way, the profile can change. I can update my description. I can update my name. I can add stuff to my profile, and it doesn't provide any worries regarding the actual content that you've published.
So, this is interesting. So what are your thoughts on the future of giving and getting credit for work done, and how those are linked to incentives, and how are you guys thinking about building that into here?
Yeah. So there's been since 2014 more of a movement as well to say, let's change from authorship to contributorship. And I really like this idea because I'm a psychologist by training, but also an applied statistician. I really like building databases, wrangling data. Writing is also okay, but I usually tend to do that less. And with a paper, it quickly happens that, you're an author, you're responsible.
Mhm.
And with contributorship, you get a bit more specific reflection of who did what, who provided the funding, who did the analysis, who collected the data.
Mhm.
And what our perspective on that is that that's a really cool idea, but they work from a taxonomy, which means that they, again, compared to, for example, these research steps where we said we don't want to be normative about what a research step is.
Mhm.
And what they do is they say in these taxonomies, like the credit taxonomy, they say, okay, we're very normative about what kind of contributions people can make to a research project.
Hmm.
And I think that's very limiting because research evolves. And what we say is, well, if we document each research step, it's implied, or we can infer who did what. So we can actually say, hey, Chris Hartgerink in this scenario contributed data. And if you were a co-author on this, it would say Chris Hartgerink and David Lang contributed data. And then, somebody else contributed the hypothesis. And there can actually be, those can be totally separate. They don't need to be the same people as well.
That's interesting. So one of the things, so I like that idea. So helping to build a system that's oriented around contributorship by breaking down the paper into multiple subsets and products. I think that's really smart. How do you solve, one of the things I'm learning is that sometimes this work happens between people, right? Like some of the discussions I'm having around my hypotheses and study design, I'm getting ideas and input from other people. So how do you can you add kind of co-authors to these individual sections too, or co-contributors? How do you do that?
So this is one of the things we're still implementing. That
Cool.
that by the time you have a profile and I'm following you, for example, that I can then also say, okay, you're also a co-author on this. So then you can simply add as many people as you want, pretty much.
I guess we could say we can call them co-contributors now, right? Because there's different parts. It's not even full paper authors.
Maybe co-conspirators.
Cool.
And I think this is also like very important because you do want recognition, and steps are taken jointly. I very rarely do work alone.
Sure.
So that is definitely one of the major things that is part of, hey, this is still alpha. So this is on the list for the next 2 weeks I need to implement.
But you know what? That's not obvious. As a non-scientist kind of looking in, it really does look like so much happens from an individual perspective. It's been very surprising to me just how collaborative the process is and how the ideas actually are between people and amongst people as much as they are, people's own curiosity.
It's very interesting that you say this, because as I moved out of academia and now running an organization and working with the team, I was in a research group, but I now am learning so much about communication and actual teamwork that I also realize how much science, even though you're working with a group, it's very much about throwing the ball from one person to the other. So it's like, hey, I did this, you throw it to the next person. So it's very sequential. And that actually doesn't require, depending on, of course, the project, and it depends on the field. But from my personal experience, it was very much sequential work. And that didn't require as much teamwork as I thought that it did, because now it's so much more intense, and the communication needs to be much clearer and tighter, and is much more frequent, that I would actually say that a lot of it is very solitary, even though we're working with other people.
Interesting.
That's my experience. I guess other people also have other experiences.
No, that could be. I think it may be that I'm just such a beginner that I'm still trying to get so much feedback and do this in a way that, I don't screw it up. So that could be just my own personal experience too. That's interesting. So is you're finding that the tool building involves more teamwork, are there things you're learning there that you think would be good to bring into the scientific process that you're trying to integrate into the tool?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's also, it affirmed to me this having more feedback moments, because I think that,
Okay.
what is it? We have discussions on GitHub that go, so like, should we put this button a bit to the right? And, and there's so many different expertises involved that communication really is a very big teaching moment for me.
Yeah.
And I feel like I would have been able to learn so much more from my co-contributors through that, because I know that, you know, everybody brings their own expertise. And for me, that was database building. For others, that was more programming. For others, that was more writing. And it feels like those interactions, the more interactions there are in that sense, the more opportunities for soaking up that knowledge. So that definitely affirmed for me this idea of, you know, iterating more instead of, you know, doing one big thing. And I think that resembles in a lot of teamwork in that sense.
Interesting. Looks great. Okay, cool.
Mm.
Great. Anything else you want to show me on this?
Yeah. So in essence, thinking about this each time that, you know, if you had Hypergraph installed as well, I could send you my profile link, which looks horrendous, but for now it works this way, because this is the, and then you could find me and you could immediately follow me as well.
Oh, cool.
And then what we also do is, because we also see it not just as the, hey, here's the application, go ahead and use it, but we realize there will be kinks and stuff that needs to be worked out. So we're also always like right here in a test, in a chat, I mean, window. So you can actually immediately go ahead and chat with somebody on the team.
Oh, cool. Well, that's helpful.
And
well, looks great.
Let's see. Yeah, this is now empty. But yeah, that's pretty much the run through at the moment. We might add something because, you know, it's quite empty at the moment, but we want to make sure that people can discover some profiles very easily, see some content, because it is a very different. So we'll be adding that maybe. But
I love it.
The bare functionality is there, and as you saw, it really takes, if you have your research work, this doesn't add a lot of overhead. It's simply adding a button, clicking on it, doing a few tiny things, and then bam, it's out in the world.
So when you say it's a publishing platform, what does a final kind of product look like when we get to like a full paper? What's that going to?
Yep.
I mean, it doesn't even have to be a paper, like the full set of steps from hypothesis to results to.
So in that sense, it really is this continuous research journey. So at any time point, you know, you, like, of course, the journal articles won't disappear all of a sudden. So people will feel this need to sort of collect these different steps and say, hey, this is now going to go, this is one project, right? So we're thinking about how can we add that you can sort of organize all of these different steps. And
so let me just see if I'm following that. So like one hypothesis could have multiple different study designs.
Exactly.
Or one data set could feed into multiple different results, or could be source for multiple different hypotheses. And hypotheses could generate multiple different data sets that are then interesting. Okay, so you are really what you're doing here is you are breaking down the paper into much smaller sizes and working with those pieces in new ways. I mean, I think it really, it's interesting when you start thinking about like that, how it does start to make you rethink the whole process and what's possible. That's really cool.
And you immediately also get to this point of, say you've done a study. I want to replicate it. You know, if in an article system, that will mean I would actually need to repeat quite a lot of what you've already said, which takes time away from me, puts pressure on the publishing system, and at the same time also creates, you know, a redundant information. So in this kind of system, it would actually mean that, you know, you shared your study design, you shared your materials, you shared your data. Hey, I just add a new data set to that to the study design.
Right.
And then I can see, hey, there are two data sets. So now we might want to, you know, collaborate on creating a new results section where we combine those and try to see, okay, were these results consistent?
Yeah. Interesting. I love it.
So
okay.
In that way, we try to incentivize replication by saying, hey, it costs you less energy to actually do it because, you know, the information is there. You just need to collect the data. And on the flip side, for you who's getting replicated, it means that if we think about this as a network, which it in essence is, all these steps following on each other, then your study design becomes much more central in that network because there are more subsequent steps that link back to it. And what we're working on as well is to provide this visual display of that network, which sort of serves like a map. So you can go and see how different things develop and where they go. It's a bit like a metro map in that sense.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, interesting. Well, I think that's very compelling. This is a new idea for me to think about this broken down and how that reorients.
So in that sense, I also want to do justice because this definitely, when I first had this idea, it felt like it was very obvious and I couldn't see anything differently anymore. But if you did some historical research on this, and this is not a new idea. So at the same time that I introduced this with my co-author Marino van Zelst, in 2018, a half a year later, there is a project that was introduced called Octopus by Alexandra Freeman that tries to do something similar. There are differences. We're working on having a conversation and writing those up. So because, you know, it's important to understand what those differences are and how we can collaborate. But then I went a bit further, and then I could find a dissertation from 2000 where this was presented in a specific form. It's not exactly the same again. Then there is a paper from 1998 by actually Elsevier researchers.
Yeah.
And then now I'm reading this dissertation from 1983, which might already be going in that direction as well. So we actually see this idea sort of go through the history of the internet and the web as well, which I find fascinating.
That is fascinating. Do you have anything? I'd love to see where you're taking notes on that. Are you just collecting those papers, or because what you're building a tool, but you're also introducing a philosophy, and you're trying to convert people to this, even though a lot of their incentives, I would say most of the academic world, this is going to go against most of their incentives. So it's this is going to be really interesting to implement a philosophy. How are you kind of studying those other attempts at this and where they went wrong and what they could have done better?
So my working philosophy is very much chaos, and then within a framework, and it also sort of resembles in Hypergraph in the idea behind that, because I also go like, use whatever you want, but then it comes together in Hypergraph. And that's how I work. So I use Zotero, I use Notion for notes, I use IA Writer for like some quick writing on the go. I use, if I want to write like a manuscript, I use R Markdown or LaTeX, and then with Visual Studio Code, because that also works well. So I'm very much all over the place. So if any of those, like you want to see a bit more, I'm happy to like put
I'd
them
love to
up on the
see,
screen.
I'd love to quickly see like some of your Notion notes. I'm just, especially if you have any regards to how you're thinking about this, like from a philosophical perspective. That would be really, really cool to see.
Let me just sort of, so, just trying to find something that's worth showing, because Notion is mostly Liberate Science related.
Oh, even that would be cool.
So maybe I'll just go ahead and put this one like that. So I am really happy we discovered Notion as an organization, because it's helped us tremendously in consolidating all of our brain farts. So, for example, a big part for me with respect to doing anything community related is our event schedule and our editorial calendar for our blog. So we actually have these very extended spreadsheets about events that are happening in a year. And we try to track, okay, who's doing what, what's the status of a specific event, when is it happening? Also, like, let's see, what's the proposal actually look like? And then we also use that to give feedback on one another, review work, track all kinds of stuff. And then what I very often do is, because there's just so much happening, and I think this is with anything nowadays, there's such an information overload. I really like these search tidbits, because yeah, I often know something is somewhere, but I don't know exactly where. So
got it.
This always really helps. And then for a lot of writing, I actually then, for our blog, I use this within Notion to then sort of draft up the work. So we have our editorial calendar, which then sort of, well, I'm giving you a sneak peek now.
Into what's coming, yeah.
Yeah, to sort of like have all these pages with different tidbits of, what's the next bit of writing that comes up. So one that I'm working on is the history of modular research.
Oh yeah, so this is exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly, because this history goes way back. So then what I sometimes do is like create these timelines in a table, sort of as a historical overview, because the reading, I try to reread a lot I'm citing and working with, because I read too much. And then it always helps to understand, okay, what is actually the historical development of these ideas? So that's what I do here. Then at the same time, this is not the place I'm writing, as you might notice. So yeah, I'm actually writing in IA Writer now, which I can actually just quickly pull up. I don't think it's also still quite new. So I try to, as I mentioned, it's just a big mess, but that also means I need some place at some point to consolidate. I'm doing more reading right now, but so I'm not really there yet.
So it starts with the bullet points and outlines, and starts to come together from there.
Very much a brain dump and iterating. It's a lot of revision work always.
Interesting.
And then one of the other things that I really like about how we work is, so what we do is we use these work cycles. And we actually, like, Notion is very powerful to track all kinds of work items. So we have these cycles where every, it's around 4 weeks usually. And we do this day where we review how did the work go, and then subsequently try to figure out what do we want to do next cycle. And we always have this like voting session about what's going to be the name, because we want a bit of a fun name. This one is called Potato Smiles. We have a tendency to choose foods. but then we have these like massive tables to sort of help us organize the work and track all of it. So this is now what I'm working on this cycle: community governance, like some analytics for our for Hypergraph, that because we very much are aware about researching like privacy sensible analytics and also opting out, and then all these kinds of things, and we can just like update them as we go along.
Yeah.
And this is one big database, and then next cycle it sort of goes like, hey, if it's not done, you know, it gets put on the radar again.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting.
If I would do research now, like I would love to collaborate with people on this in Notion, track some of the work, and really also specify much more the work that we're doing. Because a lot of it is also just winging it from my experience with with doing research. So,
well, that's cool. All right. Well, thanks for showing me that. That's really interesting. I'm finding a lot of people, or say, you know, a handful, are moving to a similar way of working on Notion. It's not. I think you're not alone there. Well, I'm really excited about this. This has been. You've shown me a new tool, but you've also given me a glimpse into this new way of thinking about this modular research. So I'm really grateful for that. And, you know, I'd love to end just by asking you. You don't have to. We can stop screen sharing, but I'd love to ask you what your ideas are for making science better. You know, if you had to distill it down to one or two, what are your big ideas?
Ooh. So, of course, this changing to as you go communication is a very big one. But I've also been reflecting on like what are other ideas, and I keep coming back to like when I was doing my PhD, it was very much this: what's my idea? What am I working on? You know, how do I build on that? And I've been changing more because I feel like this is probably one of the biggest ideas that that's come out of, well, the collective brain of the interactions of people I've been with. And I'm very excited about stimulating those interactions for other people here on out, because I see I find it a glorious thing to see an idea go from like this tiny tidbit all the way to realization. And I think there are so many people with great ideas, and I want to try and get other people to also be able to experience that. And I mean, I'm not old, so I don't want to sound like I'm almost retiring, but I really want to think about how do you bring a next generation of ideas, whether that's from, you know, people my age, younger, older, to fruition. And that's also a very big thing about bringing community together who feel the freedom to think about things differently, to not be bogged down by this is how we've always done it, but to really ask this question: can we actually change the system that has issues, or, you know, do we need to set up a new system at the same time? That doesn't mean you have to burn it down, the old one, but can you actually change the system with internal pressures, or do you need to create external pressures? And I feel like within science, at least, there are a lot of external pressures needed. And part of the mission for Liberate Science in that sense is try to, you know, create this first external pressure with Hypergraph, but then also to, you know, make that financially sustainable, and then use that money to say, hey, community, what do we want to do next? And I think once the impact can be so much bigger when, you know, a community actually feels ownership and resources to do things. And like a lot of this is always, I've been an advocate for open access. I've been an advocate for open science, but it often feels like it's just reactionary, and it's shouting against the wall, trying to change things. But then being empowered to to actually do things and imagine new futures and then realize those futures. I love that. But I don't know, that's not necessarily a big idea.
No, I think it is. I think, so you're saying we need more people to feel a sense of agency and the ability to participate in science, in this kind of having ideas and pursuing curiosity and questions, and also more people to feel the agency of building the infrastructure to enable that. It's kind of, that's what I'm hearing.
And then also give them the resources to realize those things, because I feel like there's a lot of institutions, et cetera, that talk about it, but ultimately when push comes to shove, you know, the structure isn't set up to do so. And I've also really experienced that during my PhD, but that's part of how we're trying to set up our organizational culture, to really say, hey, you know, we want to provide you with time, energy, agency, and money that you can actually realize those futures that you imagine. And that won't be easy because people have conflicting ideas about that. But that friction actually, you know, sharpens the iron instead of detracting from it. So it's very stressing. I realize that in my work day to day. But you do notice once you push through that friction, it actually, like, beautiful things grow from it.
I love it. Cool. That's great. Well, thanks so much for your time. I loved it. I appreciated the tour and the ideas, and I look forward to following along.
Well, thank you for your time, David.